And now, a Native Podcast with Matt and Zach.
And we're back with a Native Podcast. I'm one of the co-hosts, Zach, and with me, as always, is Matt. And I always got to ask Matt, how you doing there, buddy?
I'm doing pretty great, man. Can't complain too much.
Good to hear. We got a good episode in for you guys today. If you saw the title, we are going to talk about Native American housing. We're going to give you a little bit of history, a little bit of knowledge, something maybe you can share today, maybe win a trivia contest someday. Who knows? No, we're going to hope to educate you on some of the correct and appropriate terms in Native American housing and what are some of the truths and not truths today. And it's going to be fun. It's going to be exciting. I'm even going live on Instagram today just to give it a shot, give it a good old shot. So shout out to you Instagrammers. We're recording the podcast of a Native Podcast. This episode will probably come out in a couple months, but it's always fun to shout it out. Exciting stuff to talk about today. But Matt, as always, you usually have a fun fact for us. So what is that fun fact you got going on?
Yeah, no, I came across this statistic here related to our topic. So I thought it'd be good to bring up. So it's on, as Zach mentioned, we're talking about housing in relation to Native Americans. And this one's a good one that people don't know about, but Native American people experience the second highest rate of homelessness in the United States.
Wow.
So as we know, the Native population, ranges from, they say, 1% to 3% of the total population, somewhere in there.
Right.
And it says here that Native people are 10% of the homeless population.
That's wild.
So that's very disproportionate. And then it says a lack of affordable housing is tied to higher rates of homelessness in general and on tribal lands even. So
that's crazy. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, when you talk about the poverty statistics, the socioeconomical statistics, we tend to rank some of the lowest. I'm in Wolf Point, one of the poorest counties in Montana,
Right.
And it's rural. The ruralness also is another aspect to that, I think. And even some of the histories as the total histories, when you look at like Native Americans, like you talk about people on the plains, they were nomadic. They were living in teepees. That's essentially camping, and that's not even, you're not even talking 150 years ago, people still doing that. That's right. 3 generations, 2 generations, you know what I mean? So those traumas, those mishaps, those disrupts, they're there, they're present.
Oh, it's so present. And anyone that, has been to certain cities, like maybe a Spokane, Washington, or Rapid City, or Billings, even knows that like those cities have higher Native homeless.
Yes.
Well.
Right. And it's just like I hate it. Like I hated it because I went to a Catholic school in Billings, and you'd hear people say, oh, well, it's the natives, it's the and it's like, it's not though. Like, it's all the homeless. Like, there's a problem, like even with the white homeless, it's the whole homeless as a collective.
Well, they're the largest one is white.
Right, but we're in a Native population town. Like, you're going to see it, so don't blame it. Like, it's like if you see a black guy who's homeless in Detroit, like, you're not going to, like, it's like, hello, like, people live there. Like, anybody can be homeless. Like, it's crazy.
Yeah.
No, that's a fun fact. I mean, it's not a fun fact, but it's good to know about. It's good because if you know about it, you can help change it. That's the big thing. But we're getting into housing, and when we kind of hinted at the housing, we kind of hinted at the topics, we kind of hinted at the things that we're nomadic out here on the plains. We lived in teepees not too long ago. You all the way from northern Alberta, Canada, all the way down to New Mexico, into Mexico, out to the great grasslands, all the way out here in the US, the Midwest. You had the mounds, you had the people who were the mound builders, the wigwams, you had the igloos up in Alaska, the Inuits, the longhouses of both the Northeast Iroquois as well as the plank houses of the Northwest. You know, you had the Native American pit houses and the earthen houses, the cliff houses, the adobe houses, the quiche houses, and you said the Chickachee houses of the Seminole earlier today. Like, there's so many different homes and even home structures today that are based off of those. Like, you look at the stucco in the Southwest, that's from adobe,
Exactly.
you know?
Yeah, and how many places in the Northwest have you seen like that's kind of a cedar plank house looking and rainy, kind of.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's wild to see, like, it like was just trying to be forgot about. Why not embrace it? Embrace the culture. Embrace that. Hey, yes, we're in this new world of America. We are going to take these new technologies and these things and adapt. But that's what we come from. That's what we come from. That's what we known. And it explains some of the homelessness. When you talk about it, because a lot of those tribes were nomadic. People were nomadic. It was okay to camp out under the stars and live whatever, because we also didn't have that ownership of land at that one point in history. Now is there's this ownership of land that, like, hey, we don't, like, natives didn't own the land. You lived on it.
It was a foreign idea, man, to to like own your own land.
And do we even own it today? Fuck, we pay so goddamn much taxes on everything.
Yeah,
You stop paying taxes on your house, they gonna come take it from you.
I know. Oregon's terrible where I live about taxes.
Are they?
Oh,
Oh man, yeah, they are. I know. It depends. I mean, every state's different. Just like every tribe is different, and every policy affects every tribe is different because of all the different government regulations and understandings. And I guess that's why today we want to take the time to open it up to. We're going to kind of get into the housing, Indian housing. People act like, oh, natives live for free on reservations and this and that, yada yada, and that's not necessarily the case. And there's a lot of history that goes with it. There's treaty rights that go with it. There's building codes, city codes, cities, towns, reservations, tribes, state governments, federal governments. Everybody's at play here, and it's wild. And it's the Wild West. No, it's always going to be the Wild West, but even in the Wild East, because there's crazy stuff that goes on. And there's also those programs, because exactly what you say, we have some of the highest homeless rates. That's also because we hit some of the highest socioeconomical rates, where we have issues and not everybody's making millions of dollars. Natives aren't, we fall into those categories. And part of that is we have these programs to help us. And we're going to go over some of those today. We're going to share with you some resources today too. Just through our research doing this stuff. Cause we do this for free. This is me and Matt. We're sitting down at 6:00. We're off work, having a good time, chatting it up, recording a podcast, going live on Instagram with no one viewing, and we're having a good time. And it's great. We're going to talk about housing and hopefully you express some interest, maybe do a little more deeper dive over research. Maybe you have some questions that we could maybe dig into and answer. We definitely want to get a housing expert on. So if you are a housing expert and know a lot about these topics and would like to share with us your knowledge and maybe some experiences you've had, maybe a funny story too, why not? Go ahead and email us at gng@gng.net. That's G as in goat, the letter N as in Nancy, G as in goat, at gng.net, just like that. Matt will go ahead and respond and get that email responded to, and maybe we have your question on here one time. It'd be really cool. We love to answer questions for you guys as we do this and kind of get to learn and educate and teach the proper histories that aren't taught in the Western history books. Anything, Matt, as we get started, as we get going today?
Yeah, no, it's good we're covering this because this is kind of one of those main items in the treaties that were supposed to be upheld, and we're going to get into like how well were those upheld. Because along with healthcare, very similar, it's substandard. It's not always the highest quality it should be,
Right. Exactly. I on my end, I have a couple articles I'd like to share with you guys. I think I found some good articles doing my research, and uh going to just explain. There's about 6 of them here, but we'll start with the first one. And this one comes from enterprisecommunity.org. It's a blog written about the historical policies that shaped housing in Native America. It was written on May 27th of 2021. It says it just has by and no one's listed. So I don't know. But this article is part of a blog post series, Policies, Actions for Racial Equity, PARE, which explores the many ways housing policies contribute and have contributed to racial disparities in our country. The author says, Mita Kayapui, Mitakuyapi, Mita Kayupai, my relatives. When I was asked to write this blog about the historical policy effects on my native people, I was immediately excited and thought to myself, simple piece of cake. But as I began to put this blog together, it became far from simple. I started examining the timeline of the federal government had for Indian and Alaska Native housing history and the policy development that has shaped for Native American housing situation of today. 40% of on-reservation housing is considered substandard compared to 6% outside of Indian country, and nearly 1/3 of homes on reservations are overcrowded. Less than half of the homes on reservations are connected to public sewer systems, and 16% lack indoor plumbing. On our reservations, we experience lack of housing, stock, poorly constructed houses due to non-existent building codes, and enforcement of said codes, and health disparities such as increased occurrence of upper and lower respiratory illness in our communities. These health and safety factors are often exacerbated by overcrowding. For a short time in my life, I lived with 13 people in a 3-bed, 1-bath house in one of the worst housing clusters in the nation on the Pine Ridge Reservation. I have wonderful memories of that time, but when I focus on the sanitary aspects of that situation, it creates worry in me. Knowing that the life expectancy for males on the reservation that I come from is 47, this is not fiction, but stark reality for us. 11 men that I grew up with have made the journey to the other side this year. Much of this situation is the direct consequence of the many land housing policies passed over the history of the United States to isolate, subjugate Native people in this vein. I attempted to provide a brief key overview of key policies ranging from 1823 to 1924. For you here, subsequent policies will be covered in a future blog. If you would like to dive more deeply into this, please see the resources that we have curated and included in our Native home ownership curriculum. Indian Removal Act and the Marshall Trilogy Supreme Court legal case decided. The first major step to relocate American Indians came when Congress passed President Andrew Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act of May 28, 1830. This was followed by the Marshall Trilogy, a series of Supreme Court cases that became the foundation for key elements of federal Indian law policy, including the trust relationship in the case of the Cherokee Nation v. Georgia, 1831. Where the Cherokee Nation was trying to stop the removal of the nation from Georgia, the court held that Indians were not foreign nations, but domestic dependent nations, small nations that have accepted the protection of a larger nation, yet still retain their sovereignty. It referred to a guardianship, wardship relationship, meaning that we are viewed like children, and the decision in this case would set precedent for future legalities. Fort Laramie Treaty, 1851, 1868, and the fallout. In the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851, the U.S. agreed to recognize tribal authority and give aid to the Indians in return for the granted safe passage of migrants. The treaty outlined the rights and responsibilities of both the American Indians and the United States. Unfortunately, adhering to this treaty was the complex and created a lot of chaos. This caused the U.S. to approach the tribes in 1868 to sign the Second Fort Laramie Treaty, which clearly guarantees the sovereignty of the Great Sioux Nation and ownership of our sacred Black Hills, as well as land and hunting rights in the neighboring states. This new deal also promised that the Powder River country would be closed to all whites with legal control over this land. Once gold was discovered in the Black Hills, however, the military was brought in to gain control of the area in violation of the treaty. This conflict led to the Battle of Little Bighorn, and following the defeat, the Congress passed the Indian Appropriations Act of 1876, which required Sioux to cede the Black Hills or starve under siege. After a year of holding out, we ceded the land to the government, though we have never ceded the fight to the return of the Black Hills. The policies and other treaties that ensued were nothing more than a giant real estate transaction where we would cede the land claims to a territory in exchange for a smaller piece of said territory that was already in our possession. The United States government began coming to us with these new deals, starting with the 1851 Fort Laramie Treaty. This was the beginning of the reservation system. The purpose of the reservation system, for the most part, was to remove land from the Indians, force assimilation to European ways, and to separate the Indians from European settlers. Forced assimilation, Indian boarding schools, and the Dawes Act. The Dawes and Allotment Act of 1887 was designated for the native assimilation and to break up our tribal structure. Though it ended up as another scheme for our land, the Dawes Allotment Act, in exchange for citizenship, took our land, fractioned the land in individual plots, allotting to the male head of the household 160 acres, and what was over-deemed surplus was open to purchase for white homesteaders. The reservation system was nearly destroyed, and from the beginning, we violently opposed this New Deal, and because we understood what it meant to our way of life. With our land rights revoked, the next step in assimilation mission was to end tribal affiliation, mostly by targeting youth. Between 1889 and 1960, there were 357 Indian boarding schools operating in 30 states. By 1926, approximately 83% of the Indian school-age children were attending boarding schools throughout the United States. General Henry Patton, founder of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, stated, "The only good Indian is a dead one." The often traumatic and long-lasting effects of the Indian boarding school experience has had on survivors and their descendants resonates in Native communities to this day. In November 2019, I helped facilitate a historical trauma training in Sisseton, South Dakota, which the tribal authority had put for their employees after a housing maintenance worker had committed suicide while on the job. The public was also invited to attend. During the session, the question was posed to me. There are members in our community that are asking, is this a mental health issue? So why is the Tribal Housing Authority putting this training on? My response was, you ask any tribal police officer on any reservation in America about the different calls he or she responds to in our communities, and the responses will be mainly domestic violent issues, including spouse rape, incest, amongst others. We don't have these type of abuses in our communities before the boarding schools. But now, after a few generations of our relatives attending those schools, the abuses and the experience run rampant on our reservations. So I commend the Housing Authority for thinking outside the box and addressing the root of those issues. We encourage all who believe in creating a just society to read and to discuss and share Pair Blog. And that was I wish it said that. No, it doesn't say the artist, but I'm sure if you go to the Pair website, Policies Action for Racial Equality, you could be able to find who wrote that. But I think honestly, that was a good kind of history on the housing, how those acts, and we talk about those acts in some of our previous episodes.
Oh, so much. And I liked how that came from someone who lives in the community, as opposed to because sometimes like the professional or those people are a little bit removed from it, and it's like he's there. He lived himself in a crowded home, and
right.
And so that's like really more powerful to me to hear that coming from someone like that about the housing issues.
Well, and not only that those issues exist, but those issues help forge what's happening today and where we're at today.
Did you know there's a new native apparel company?
No, I did not.
It's called Shop LS 574, named after the 574 federal tribes and the Little Shell descendancy of its founders.
Wow, that's really cool, man.
It is. It is becoming a spot to order native apparel by and for natives, working with native designers and teams to help best represent Indian country. That's
awesome, dude.
For sure. Now make sure to go pick up some Native podcast swag as well as other native gear while shopping at shopls574.com.
Oh, yeah. And do not forget to use code ANP10 to save on your next order.
That's ANP10. Hey Matt, did you know there's a tribally owned net company?
No, I did not.
Not only are they tribally owned, but Blue Ribbon Nets also creates totally sustainable products. With Blue Ribbon Nets, not only are you getting quality nets, but even eco-friendly ones as well.
That's awesome, dude.
It sure is indeed. Make sure to use code RUGAROO10 on your next Blue Ribbon Net order to save. Again, the code is RUGAROO10, RUGARU10.
I am definitely getting a Blue Ribbon net now.
Tune in every Tuesday to hear your favorite native podcast.
That's right. A Native Podcast has new episodes every week, ranging from boarding schools to Indian child welfare.
Not only that, but we have Indian country covered from Maine to California and Florida to Alaska, Hopi to Blackfeet and Choctaw to Tlingit, and all those Crees in between.
And all you other natives and non-natives out there, we want to remind you to tune in this Tuesday to A Native Podcast.
Is your res runner in need of new lights? Well, look no further than our friends at Oxteo, an industry leader in LED lights. Make sure to use code RUGAROO on your next set of lights. That's RUGARU.
HUD, if you go to HUD.gov, in spring of 2015, they have right here obstacles, solutions, and self-determination in Indian housing policy. In Indian country, land under the jurisdiction of tribal governments is composed vastly of different communities requiring multifaceted and local relevant housing solutions. The United States has a legal trust obligation to promote the welfare of Native Americans in Indian country, which the federal government fulfills through a self-determination framework. The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act, NAHASTA, right? You've heard that before, NASDA, of 1996 granted tribes the authority to determine the housing programs they will fund, the individuals served, and the delivery method of those programs. NASDA also requires the federal government to consult with tribes, including periodic negotiated rulemaking with tribal leaders. The helping expedite and advance responsible tribal home ownership, HEARTH, HEARTH Act grants Native nations control over land leasing, further empowering tribes to exercise their inherent sovereignty over tribal lands. Right here in this HUD, they talk about Indian country. The collective term for land under the jurisdiction of tribal governments is composed of vastly different communities that require multifaceted and local relevant housing solutions. Native Americans hail from more than 574 tribes representing a plethora of cultural and diverse histories, languages, religious beliefs, and traditions. More than 5 million individuals, which we estimate to be closer to 10 million, if not 12, identify themselves as American Indian and Alaskan Native, AIAN, alone or in combination with some other race. And though roughly 48% of those individuals live in a tribal area or surrounding county, communities range from the size of 20 acres in Alturas, Indian Rancheria in California, to the 27,000 square mile Navajo Nation spanning portions of Utah, Arizona, and New Mexico. The housing challenges of Native American communities are similarly diverse, encompassing urban, suburban, and rural environments, and climates that range from the arid desert to the frozen tundra. So this article kind of explains how the Act of 1996 really kind of formed that self-determination, So as our land was ceded from us, as we're gaining these rights back throughout the early 1900s, there's all this different things going on. And then in 1996, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act is passed. And historically, federal housing policies did not respond adequately to the diversity of housing conditions and the needs in Indian country. According to a 1996 Urban Institute assessment of tribal housing, lending the authors to the state that the housing programs must also accommodate the legitimate demands for self-determination made by the Native American tribes and sovereign nations. In 1996, Native Americans on a national commission established by a Congress helped draft a new Law, the Native American Housing and Assistance and Self-Determination Act, NASDA, of 1996, as part of an effort to evaluate alternative strategies and develop management and modernization of housing for Native Americans. NASDA reorganized federal housing programs and simplified the system of funding affordable housing in Indian country while representing the principle of tribal self-governance. The act gave tribes the flexibility to allocate and develop funds to projects more relevant to tribes needed to move away from the one-size-fits-all approach, says Roger Boyd, Deputy Assistant Secretary of HUD's Office of Native American Programs, ONAP. In a 2010 U.S. Government Accountability Office survey of NASDA guarantees, 90% of respondents reported that NASDA has helped tribes meet housing needs. So they're improving as time goes on.
I'm in there with
Yeah.
So a couple of things, like as we've talked about in previous podcasts, the Marshall Trilogy and the Dawes Allotment Act,
Right.
those two things alone have set up so many of these tribal systems we have today. And it's
Right.
like what you just said, the one size fit all, like every tribe's different. So their housing issues will be different and their numbers are different. And so like giving them a little more like sovereignty almost to like, hey, like we're going to run housing this way. This other tribe's going to do it a different way.
No, exactly.
So much, you know.
Well, and essentially what set that up, right? So right here it says the self-determination framework. The United States fulfills its trust obligation to tribes through self-determination framework, a policy change announced by President Nixon's 1970 special message to Congress, recommendations for Indian policy. Self-determination is rooted in tribal sovereignty, the legal right of tribes to govern certain affairs such as passing laws, taxing residents, and operating judicial courts. Through greater self-governance, self-determination empowers tribes to address a range of issues such as education, economic development, and housing in a culturally relevant manner. In 1975, Congress formally confided the change with the Indian Self-Determination and Education Assistance Act, which allowed tribes rather than federal officials to administer certain federal programs such as the Housing Improvement Program funded by the U.S. Department of Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs, BIA. According to Stephen Cornell, faculty associate of the Native Nations Institute for Leadership, Management and Policy at the University of Arizona, Native American leaders pursued self-determination during the civil rights era, but their grievances differed from those of minority groups in that they sought control over lands in the internal affairs rather than asserting rights to resources such as housing, healthcare, and education. The framework grew out of failure of previous Indian policies encouraged development on reservations. Under the Dawes Act of 1887, 90 million acres of tribal land was lost through the sale of non-Indians, resulting in 4 types of land ownership in Indian country: tribal land, tribal trust land, individual trust land, fee simple land owned by Indians, and fee simple land owned by non-Indians. That would continue to complicate development because of the different rules governing the use of each land type. In 1934, Congress passed the Indian Reorganization Act, IRA, which halted the sale of Indian land and allowed the tribes that created constitutions based on federal regulations to take some self-governance. Although criticized for applying a single constitutional model in all of Indian country, IRA did advance the idea of tribal sovereignty by granting some self-governance and establish the trust obligation of the federal government. Congress reversed the self-governance in the 1950s and began a policy of tribal termination through the unilateral ending of the special relationship between tribes and the federal government. Congress dissolved the reservations of 5 large tribes, terminating tribes in 4 states, and extended state jurisdiction over several reservations that were not terminated. The policy of tribal termination ended with the rise of self-determination. Unlike federal policy, self-determination helps some tribes flourish culturally and economically. For example, Native American per capita income grew by 23.5% from 1990 to 2000 and 10.5% from 2000 to 2010. Research from the Harvard Project on the American Indian Economical Development, HPAIED, finds that the self-determination puts the development agenda in Indians' hands, marries the decisions and their consequences, leading to better decisions. Under previous policies, those overseeing Indian country were often non-Indians with little direct stake in outcomes, consequences of the policies they enforced. Placing control in the hands of tribal members ensured that ones making the decisions were the ones bearing the cost of failure, encouraging leaders to learn from their mistakes and to develop more effective governing institutions. The practical sovereignty afforded the self-determination policies is not necessarily conditioned for reservation economical development. Some tribes have succeeded within this framework by taking advantage of greater self-governance to more effectively run reservations and diversify their economies. For example, Ho-Chunk Incorporated, the development arm of the Winnebago tribe of Nebraska, operates more than 30 subsidiary corporations in sectors that include information technology, construction, government contracting, and retail, in addition to gaming. The Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians has successfully and virtually eliminating unemployment by building a strong manufacturing economy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they figure it out. It's interesting. Land has always been interesting, especially in this country. And you think about it too, right? Like they knew of the land. The Vikings and stuff, they came over from Iceland. They came over from the Scandinavian countries. They knew the natives were here. They were trading with them. That was happening. They must have known we weren't using the land the same way they were in Europe. And Europe wanted our land. Let's be real.
No, all the changes with housing that took place, like for the better, right? Because things are improving now. You don't hear as much about Native people like, oh, like we're on the wait list for housing. Someone's got to die. And that was the dark joke, is like someone had to die for them to like get a house because they're on a wait list for housing. And it's like, that was the reality for like a lot of tribes.
It really was. And it's this not understanding, it's the lack of funding. But then it was, hey, let's wake up, let's let the tribes start to govern themselves, start to figure themselves out. Some are doing better than others, as you see. And there's reasons for that. There's a lot of reasons for everything, and they're unique. So that's, if you ever want to do that deeper dive, remember, we're kind of the 101. We're we're laying down some of these policies, these information, and we're talking Indian housing. Like this is where we'll start. This is what we'll talk about, and this is what we'll get into, because it's interesting. Each tribe's different, like you're saying. And in 1996, it really got different. Funding changed. Some tribes started building houses for tribal members, especially like elder programs. You see, they have elder housing.
Elder housing is like significantly improved with all tribes.
No, it really has. It really has. I'm trying to see HUD. They talk more on this article if you want to check it out. It's HUDuser.gov, 2015 spring obstacle solution self-determination and Indian housing policy. They have some good stuff. But I wanted to show you some of the HUD's resources as well that they have available when you go to their website to learn about housing, especially for tribal resources. Because the role, and this is kind of one of those, when you talk about the federal aspects, and the federal rights that are given to tribal members and tribal people. The role of tribal housing, as Tribal Housing Board of Commissioners, executive directors, housing staff, your hard work and effort creates a safe, prosperous communities for Native families by expanding home ownership and affordable housing opportunities, empowering residents of Indian housing through creation of jobs and economical development opportunities, enforcing fair housing opportunities, making Indian housing developments drug-free, and helping to end overcrowding and homelessness. Some people are using the term houselessness too, which I think is kind of cool. This page is designed to provide you with the tools and information you need to make informed decisions regarding the administration of housing, community, and the economic development programs for your nation. Introduction to ONAP programs. As sovereign nations, tribes are direct recipients of federal funding from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. Each tribe designates an entity to administer its housing programs with these federal dollars, referred to as tribally designated entity or TDHE. The organization may be a department within the tribe, tribal housing authority with separate board commissioners, or a nonprofit organization. The entity designed by the tribe to receive HUD funds must comply with the rules requirements of this program. The Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996, NASDA, PL 104-330, became a law on January 3rd, 1996, and its governing statute of the Office of Native American Programs. And the intent of the law was to provide federal assistance for Indian tribes in a manner that recognizes the rights of tribal self-governance. NASDA gave tribal governments greater control over the housing program by consolidating a number of federal housing programs that provided funding primarily to low-income Native Americans into a single formula-driven recurring block grant program. Under the housing block grant, tribes self-determination, the plan, design, construction, and maintenance of affordable housing on the Indian reservations and Native communities. Regulations for NASDA, which are negotiated with the tribe after each reauthorization of the statute, can be found in the Code of Federal Regulations at 24 CFR Part 1000. HUD's Office of Public and Indian Housing, PIH, issues notices and to articulate regulations in more detail. Notices are reviewed and approved by HUD's Office of General Counsel. HUD's Office of Native American Programs issues program guidance, which are less formal interpretations of as regulation and is not vetted by the Office of General Counsel. They have a bunch of links, and here are some of the programs. And we'll get into these programs a little bit more later, but you have the Indian Housing Block Grant, the IHBG, established by the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 1996. The IHBG program is a formula-based grant program. Eligible activities include housing development, assistance to housing developed under Indian Housing Program, housing services to eligible families and individuals, crime prevention and safety, and model activities that provide creative approaches to solving affordable housing problems. The Section 184 Indian Home Loan Guarantee Program. So this is what I used when I got my home loan. The Section 184 program was created in 1992 to help increase Native access to home ownership by providing a guarantee to lenders on mortgage loans made to Native borrowers, including American Indian and Alaska Native families. Alaska villages, tribes, or tribally designated housing entities, Section 184 loans can be used both on and off Native lands, and for new construction, rehabilitation, purchase of an existing home, or refinancing a loan. So this really helps Natives out when you're financing a house. The Indian community. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Add with that, my brother and his wife, they're going to be using that soon as well. And majority of the areas that it's eligible for is the Western United States, west of the Mississippi, majority of those states. There's a link on there that'll show you the amounts they'll lend you by county, depending on what county you live in. And it's a really good resource. It really.
No, it really is. That's what we use to get our home, because it kind of guarantees those. It's for low income in that sense too, where you're not able to necessarily put down as much on a home or those kind of things. And it's a great program that is out there. Go ahead.
It was just expanded to there's a down payment assistance. I think the Rosebud Sioux tribe is actually the one that's funding that. Actually, yeah. My brother.
There's a few tribes too that do their own tribal unique kind of loans as well. So if you're a tribal member and you're looking at that when you're looking at home loans or housing or refinancing or wanting to build a house, call up your tribal housing director and say, hey, what options do I have?
It's great considering the overall housing market right now, because this is a loophole in for some. So
it really is. If you have bad credit, all that, it does.
And now music on a Native podcast.
This week's song, Electric Powwow Drum by a
A Tribe Called Red.
And that was A Tribe Called Red, Electric Powwow Drum. Now back to the podcast. Indian Communication Development Block Grant, ICDBG, awarded under an annual competition. Indian Community Development Block Grants provide single-purpose grants for housing rehabilitation, land acquisition, community facilities, infrastructure construction, and economical development activities that benefit primarily for low and moderate income persons. So there's grants out there for you. Title VI Loan Guarantee Program also authorizes under NASDA. The Title VI Loan Guarantee Program assists Indian housing block grants recipients, borrower, who want to finance eligible affordable housing activities, but are unable to secure financing without the assistance of federal guarantee. Native Hawaiian Housing Block Grant, NHHBG. NASDA was amended in 2000 to add Title VIII housing assistance for Native Hawaiians.
I had a little short tidbit on the Hawaiian Homes Act to add to that. What Zach's referring to is the federal program that's assisting Hawaiians. The original with the state of Hawaii, because Native Hawaiians are only state recognized, unfortunately. Um, but the Department of Hawaiian Homelands in the state of Hawaii created Hawaiian Homes Commission to administer certain public lands called Hawaiian homelands for homesteads. Native Hawaiians are defined as individuals having at least 50% Hawaiian blood. The act was incorporated into the state constitution in 1959 when Hawaii was granted statehood. That program, this federal one you're referring to, I know made improvements to that, because the problem with it is there was such a long waiting list for the building of these homes that like people weren't getting housing there. So, and that's why Native Hawaiians also have very high homelessness rate as American Indian. So just to provide a little bit of history there. But yeah.
No, definitely. No, that's definitely really cool, because there's also the Hawaiian Section 184A loan,
Yeah.
home loan guarantee as well. That helps. So there's a federal assistance, private. It authorized in 2000. The Section 184A program provides access for private funding for home ownership, property rehabilitation, new construction opportunities for eligible Native Hawaiian individuals and families. The use of the Section 184A loan guarantee program is limited to owner-occupant single-family dwellings located on Hawaiian homelands. So there's all sorts of things that are really cool that you can do and apply for and see. With HUD, if you're looking for housing within Indian country, and it's nice that we have those programs, because not everyone can afford it, and it helps kind of build those tribal economies in those tribal settings in those communities, but it's all right,
No, they're really good programs, and we're fortunate and a lot of people, like, we're talking about this on here. Like, I've talked to Native people that have no idea these programs exist.
And that's a problem. It really is. That it shows you how much our tribal councils, our tribal communities, these tribal programs are dealing with, because they don't necessarily have the time to go out there and tell everyone and educate them on this, because they're so busy all the time with all the other issues going on, that we have to take the time here, and we're going to share. I'm not saying that they don't do a good job at it, but we as Native people need to do the research sometimes, and it's there for us. These programs, through the histories, and that's why we wanted to talk about the histories at the beginning of this, is because you need to learn those histories to understand where we're at today. Because when you get here today, it's like, well, these programs are set up because of, you know what I mean? And now we're able, not necessarily, I hate people use the term take advantage, because those are the tribal treaty rights. This land, this North America, these reservations on this map were the whole country at one point, right? That was our land.
Drunk down.
Like I fucking hate it when these colonizers say, oh, like, it's your land, it's this. It's like, no, we're like, you get things for free, you get this, you get that. No, we sold land that we didn't want to sell. You've twisted our fucking arm to sell it. And these are our rights. These are our inherent rights. So yes, I want to take advantage of a Section 184 loan when the housing market is tough, because I have the right to, because my ancestors fucking had to go through boarding schools. They had to suffer the traumas. They had to sell their homelands that they didn't want to sell. They were forced onto these reservations. I live in Wolf Point. It's not pretty up here. I mean, it is pretty. But it's like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not the best fertile land that all the natives are living on. Yeah, you kept pushing us to these reservations. And these programs are also set up for those who need these programs. There is a need. And there's a need for more money. There's a need for more of that, right? Like, we can't just like let it just gets me going.
Well, it's like you talk about generational wealth. Well, natives, black folks, like look who's at the bottom. Who's had a chance to build generational wealth? Well, we all know who that is.
Exactly, because they couldn't keep building it in Europe. They had to bring it here, and that's such a, like, that's even a European mindset of generational wealth. Like, you get to the root of our culture as Native people, it's community. It's
Right.
being together. I know, yes, living 13 people in a house is a lot and unbearable, and each person should have a bedroom in today's standard. But like, you're close with home. You're growing up with your siblings. You're growing up with your cousins. Like, that to me is, there's a value to that as well.
Right.
So, feel sorry because we got in that place, but like, I feel sorry too, because I feel like we as Native people are closer community with our relations, our cousins, our nephews, our uncles, our aunties, our grandmas. Like, think about it when you really look at the root of it all.
Yeah, and I mean it's not even our own blood at times.
Exactly, that's what I'm saying. And it, it is what it is, right? We got here, here's what we are, here's housing, here's some resources that I wanted to share, including the Native American National American Indian Housing Council Development Handbook by Brian Pearson. He's an attorney for the Indian Nations Practice Group leader, Godfrey and Khan SC. And I'm just going to read you the foreword that he wrote. The foreword or the preface? The preface. I'm going to read the preface. Preparation of a handbook attempting to address a topic as broad as Indian housing development requires a compromise between conscious simplicity and user friendliness on the one hand, and through the thoroughness on the other. The handbook includes numerous references to statutes, regulations, and court cases that relate to Indian housing. Readers should follow NAIHC updates posted on its website, www.naihc.net, and consult with their attorneys to confirm the statutes of laws and regulations relating to which Indian housing. So that's kind of an Indian housing development resource I wanted to share. I kind of lastly also wanted to share right here it is, the housing needs on Native American tribal lands. This is kind of a study done by the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Just to give you kind of a current status, I believe this study was done in 2015, 2016, 2017, somewhere in there, because that's kind of all their sources come from there. those dates.
Studies they do every like 5 years or something. Like a lot of them are like every 5 years.
Exactly. Native Americans on tribal lands have some of the worst housing needs in the United States. They face high poverty rates and low incomes, overcrowding, lack of plumbing and heat, and unique development issues. Despite the growing need for safe, decent homes, federal investments in affordable housing on tribal lands have been chronically underfunded for decades, particularly in more rural and remote areas. Recent changes to federal Native American housing programs have led to an even greater reduction in resource for communities in most need. The National Low Income Housing Coalition strongly urges Congress to increase funding to build and preserve affordable homes for the lowest income people in Native American communities. Areas with greatest needs. Native communities in more rural and remote areas experience additional barriers as a result for their limited access to employment and development resources. While these communities have significant need, data sources for nearly all federal housing resources undercount these tribes' populations, leading to less funding for crucial housing programs. Because of high poverty rates and lower median incomes, Native Americans living on tribal lands have fewer resources to meet housing needs. High poverty, 1/3, 32% of Native households on tribal lands live in poverty, compared to 18% of households nationwide. The tribal lands in the plains, a largely rural region, has especially high poverty rate of 41%.
Um,
Lower incomes. In 2015, the annual median household income among Native Americans and Alaska Natives was $37,000, or 33% less than the national median income and 15% lower than the households in non-metro areas. Overcrowding and poor living conditions. More than a third of Native families in tribal lands live in homes that are overcrowded or lack basic amenities such as plumbing, a refrigerator, or heating. Overcrowded homes. Doubling up to prevent homelessness is common in tribal lands, often leading to overcrowding. Almost every Native community reports of overcrowding as an issue. Nearly 16% of households across tribal lands live in overcrowded conditions compared to 2.2% nationally. Poor housing conditions. Families in tribal lands are almost 5 times more likely to live in poor housing conditions compared to those of the general population. They are 5 times more likely to live in homes that lack basic plumbing, nearly 4 times more likely to live in homes without a sink, range, or refrigerator, and 1,200 times more likely to live in a home with heating issues. The hardest hit communities are in largely rural regions of the plains, Alaska, and Southwest. Lack of infrastructure. Native people living on tribal lands face unique development barriers to building and preserving safe, decent, and affordable homes. High development costs. Half of tribal governments indicate development costs were very serious or fairly serious barrier to building affordable homes. Limited infrastructure. Infrastructure for sewage, gas, electricity, and highways can be limited on tribal lands, especially in more remote regions. Some 70% of tribal governments identify infrastructure costs as one of the major barriers for development. So, those are just some of the reasons why we have these housing programs. We need these housing programs, and we need to do better and be better. And that's why we need to educate, right? And that's partly why we're here too today, right? Is to educate, to share our knowledge, to share our research, and hopefully someone out there is listening and wants to do something and help Indian country where it needs. That's kind of, I think, my goal when we think about these subjects we talk about.
yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing is it's still, these things are still lacking awareness, which is like, even with social media, even with all the connectivity of everyone, like, there's still people that don't know about it. And you mentioned just in your last spiel there, accurate census numbers is affecting every area. They're like, with funding, right? And that alone has got to be a priority. And I know the work we do at G&D, when we pick up census again, we're going to have to really drive it home to them that our numbers are much higher than what reported. So,
and not only that, but like the numbers, when you look at the census numbers, the importance of those numbers because of what they do affect in Indian country, right? Like, they don't affect just schools and housing and roads, right? They affect when you go to IHS and your IHS says it serves 13,000 people, but really there's 15,000 in the community, right? Like, it's those numbers that we cite. You go to census data and say this community has this many people, right? Like, so it's getting accurate numbers because you want an accurate representation of your community, so that way you do get the resources and funding necessary.
And our population is growing. I keep seeing, like, it's younger in age and it's growing. So,
Exactly.
yeah, no, that was a good spiel you had there.
No, I really think, this is one of those topics, housing, right? Like, we're kind of coming to the end here. And when you think about it, we're not experts by any means. We never claim to be it, but we want to kind of dive in that knowledge, right? We want to get that 101 information. We want to understand it a little bit more, because as we go forward, as we talk about it, as you mention these things, as you understand these topics and conversations, we like to kind of have a grassroots based knowledge of like, hey, this is what we know. This is what it kind of is. When we talk about housing, we kind of understand there's a lot of complexities to it. Yes. There's 100 years of policies and court cases and legal jargon and this BS and that BS, right? That gets us to where we're at in 2023, right? So it's definitely one of those things that we must be careful and be cautious about, because we as Indian people have these rights, right? So we now in day are kind of accessing these rights a little bit better, because we're understanding them a little more clear. It really sucks that our ancestors, that all this happened to them, but through those warriors, and I again, Reno, in back of my mind is always saying it, the warriors are in the courtroom. They're fighting for these things. They're making sure we're able to afford our housing. They're making sure we have needs, so we need to do our part to help them out. What?
I gotta meet this Reno sometime. You bring.
You'll like Reno. She's a nice lady.
Yeah. No, you said it well there. I think yeah, and there's good groups out there doing work right now for housing. I see so much of it going on. So
Right. Any final words, Matt?
yeah. On that note, there's one nonprofit I would like to mention who's doing good work in this area, and they're called Thunder Valley Community Development Corporation. They're located on Pine Ridge Reservation, and they're creating sustainable housing for Lakota people. They're a nonprofit. They do language. They do a bunch of stuff, but their housing part, they've designed a whole community that has like solar panels and that we need more of that. We need more grassroots, like you said. And there's other groups with other tribes doing that same kind of work, but I just wanted to highlight them. I know about them. I'm familiar with their work. So check them out. They have a pretty good website.
Nice. No, definitely. There's all those things. There's local regional groups that you maybe be able to tap into too as well. Like tribal organizations. I did the 184 program myself. It's a good housing program. I definitely recommend it. I definitely recommend that you guys check out other programs or other opportunities that may be beneficial to you. Or if you just want to learn more about the subject, dive right in, be my guest. There's a lot of help we need, advocacy, as they say, because there's a lot to learn about. There's a lot to understand, because these are our inherent rights when you talk about, treaties and what was agreed upon between the federal U.S. government and the sovereign nations, the tribes, so it's good to learn about. But until next time, bye-bye.
I know ballers, I know chiefs, I know riders from the east, I know educated natives down to picket in the streets, middle fingers to police, fuck you, we come in peace. I know red-skinned hippies that be giving me the creeps. I know beauty, I know beach, I know savages and freaks, and I know a couple cousins even bougier than me. No, ain't elite, bougie native, yes indeed. Art exhibit to the club, and we roll it 20 deep. Copper on my neck, gold on my ring, feather on my hat, skin stitched chin, 100 warriors on my back, they be drumming when I sing, man, there ain't no way around it.
A Native Podcast is produced by G&G Advertising and Quartz Lake Productions.